The PsychSessions podcast is now sponsored by STP. That's the Society for the Teaching of Psychology. That's APA Division 2, also known as our Teaching Tribe. Check out the May 2020 issue of STP News on the teachsite.org website for information about STP's programming at APA 2020 and the annual Conference on Teaching coming up in October 2020. The newsletter also contains links to apply to the annual SOTL workshop and to STP's professional mentoring network as a mentor or mentee. Be sure to read the monthly columns from our graduate students, early career psychologists, and diversity committee.
Hello, and welcome to PsychSessions, conversations about teaching and stuff. I'm Eric Landrum, along with Garth Neufeld, your podcast hosts. As the name implies, we center our conversations about teaching, but we often veer into other interesting topics, which is the end stuff. This is episode number 92, where Garth had the opportunity to welcome back to the podcast Dave Myers from Hope College in Holland, Michigan. Now, before you hear the interview, please allow me to share some listening tips and some of my favorite moments. Now, Garth talked about this, and I want to talk about this a little bit as well. This is going to be the first episode that we've had a return guest in this type of long interview form. And I'm just going to tell you right now, there are hundreds of people, literally hundreds of people I can think of that I'd love to still have on the podcast. So you might be thinking, well, why would you have someone back on for a second time when there's a bunch of people that you haven't had on for the first time, which is a really legitimate thing to be thinking about. So first off, we're not going to cycle back through we're not done with our first original interviews, but there are all kinds of people that we'd like to have on for a second time and maybe occasionally for a third time. Plus, it is Dave Myers, who happens to be right now, to the best of my knowledge and the data that I've seen, the world's leading textbook, Introduction to Psychology textbook author. And so we had the opportunity through technology during COVID-19 to talk with Dave, and we took it. And so I'm glad that Garth did this interview. And I wanted to explain to our listeners a little bit of our rationale there. So now let me just share some of my favorite listening moments and give you some things to look forward to. I do love that Dave talks about what's top of mind. And so he's been doing some writing, not only of essays, but with a trade book coming out. And, I don't know how our listeners feel about this. I love the inside baseball stuff, meaning he'll talk about the book publishing industry. He'll talk about his textbook updates. He never brings it up himself. He's always asked about it. And Garth and I always, when we have a book publisher or a textbook author, no matter who is the publisher, we always ask about the book. And so we want to know about Dave's projects, and he's very gracious and kind to share those details with us. I loved it that they talked about politics. I mean, clearly, that's also another topic that's top of mind for us right now in COVID-19 in terms of policies and how Democrats and Republicans are trying to solve the problem and their different approaches. And to no one's surprise, Dave is very respectful of the different opinions and approaches that people in different parties are having. Garth and Dave get into a really interesting conversation about free speech and free speech on campuses. And this is something that we deal with, obviously, as educators, oftentimes on a daily basis. And even with the notion of Zoom bombing and having things going on with, open events, so to speak, on our campuses. And I think they do a really good job of honing in on this notion of it's drawing the line. So where is that line between honoring this really important construct of free speech, but then not accepting any hate speech? And how do you figure that out? And so they begin to have this really important conversation about that topic. They segue into a conversation about advanced placement psychology and what that means and what the changes right now in COVID-19 mean, not only for the AP psychology students, but for the reading, for psychology, community college, high school, college readers, and what that's going to mean with the FRQs and how that process is going to change. Garth did his homework. I was really impressed with him. He went back and he re-listened to Dave's original interview, which I believe is episode number 5. If you want to go back and listen to the double header, back to back, and both Dave Myers and Al Bandura graduated from the University of Iowa, and he asks Dave about the University of Iowa. And Dave is a kind, gentle person, but it's pretty clear that Dave does not have a lot of positive things to say about his graduate alma mater. So that's an interesting thing to listen to. I do like the inside baseball things about listening to Dave, learn about writing, how writing was a chore for him, about he has a writing coach. And I've heard him talk about these things in his talks before. They get some updates on things like Dave's interest and passion for improving hearing capabilities at facilities around the nation, really around the world. They talk about hearingloop.org, one of Dave's many passions. And then Garth ends the interview talking about the Dave and Carol Myers Foundation, which I would encourage you to check out. Also, there was one other website I wanted to mention to you, Braver Angels, something that Dave mentioned that he supports. So enjoy.
This is Garth, and I am in my basement, and I have on the call with me today Dr. Dave Myers from Hope College for a second interview. Dave, I believe you were episode 3, and now you're going to be episode 90 something here.
Oh my! What a tribute to you, Garth, and what you've contributed to the teaching of psychology by connecting us with so many people.
Oh my gosh! Well, we appreciate it. That means a lot coming from you. That's for sure. I'm excited to talk to you. This is the first time we've done a recording with that. Well, that is not a face-to-face recording for one of our Psych Sessions episodes. So thank you for being our guinea pig.
Okay.
Or because we're psychologists, we could maybe a rat would be
right.
better.
Right.
We had a chance. Do you have any in your mind? Do you want to take a guess at how long ago you and I sat down to talk?
That's a good question. So maybe 3 years.
Oh my goodness, you were almost right on. So I would have said 3 years ago, coming up this month. So yeah, how did you pull that out? Do you have a really good sense of time?
No, but we had it at a particular place, a new home of ours that must have been about a year old, and that home was only about 4 years old. So it kind of narrowed it down.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. This is my first time interviewing somebody for a second time. So I wanted to make sure we didn't go around and round in things that I had asked you about the first time. So I actually re-listened to the episode this morning of our conversation. And you had just gotten into that house not very long before we talked that day on Bainbridge. So yeah, 3 years. I couldn't actually believe it when I was going back to listen to it. And, there's lots of connections I want to talk about today, including a University of Iowa connection. As I was listening back, so many interviews have happened since we chatted that I have, all this information to pull from. So I'll circle back to some of that stuff and ask you a few questions if that's okay.
Let's go for it.
Great. Well, hey, you guys are still in Michigan, and this is an interesting time to be in the world and in our country. and also in Michigan. So we'll probably get to that. And of course, we can edit out anything if I ask you something you don't want to talk about because it's too close to home. But how are you guys coping over there? And I mean, personally, how are you doing with the whole COVID, the lockdown situation?
Personally, I'm doing fine, Garth. As I look around the people in the world around me, I see two groups of people that are really more significantly challenged. One are those who live alone, often in uh, cramped apartments, who uh, may be experiencing loneliness because of the deprivation of human relationships and the undermining of their need to belong, as we say. The other group of people are those who are living in crowded situations, maybe having to do jobs from home while also having to manage or even homeschool children. And so they're facing a lot of stress. In between are some of us who live with somebody we love in a situation that's an amply sized home. We don't have the worst of it. We have the best situation here. And so, though we feel deprived of our routines and our relationships, we're doing well. And that's us.
Yeah, isn't it interesting to think about the technology that connects us now that wasn't there even 10 years ago? Do you use Zoom to connect with your family who you're not in the same city as, or do you guys? How are you connecting right now with your social and family groups?
Yeah, so we have used Zoom for family connections, including one involving my daughter who lives in South Africa. I'm at great distance from my family members. And of course, Zoom and other social media have enabled us to have meetings, to teach classes, to sustain relationships. And so it's a blessing, but it's not face to face. And we're really bred ancestrally for face to face, eyeball to eyeball relationships with all their nuances. So it's not the same thing, but it's certainly better than nothing.
Okay, this is a question. I was having a conversation with a friend yesterday, and he said, "What are psychologists saying about this?" We didn't have great video technology probably until the last decade as far as communication. I recall from a human development class, I can't remember the study, but I recalled that that children didn't learn the same material, even presented in the same way. They didn't learn the same material as well when it was on a television versus when they had somebody in the room with them. I know that's different, but do you? I'm guessing there's not a ton of research on what we're dealing with, which is communicating and socializing via video chat. Do you? I hear you saying that it's in your mind probably not equivalent.
That would be my guess, but you're right. We haven't seen a lot of research. I would guess that we're going to see a lot more as a result of what's happened. But of course, it's not just the the deprivation of face-to-face, eyeball-to-eyeball together relationship. It's also our communal gatherings that we're missing, our sports, our parties, our worshiping, um, and the whole question of whether off-site online learning is as effective in engaging and retaining students as face-to-face classroom experience is another question we're going to learn more about. Um, I would say history teaches us that online students tend to have a higher dropout rate during the course of the semester than do those attending classes in person. But there may be a variety of reasons for that.
Right. I was as I said, I was listening to your to the interview we did 3 years ago, and one of the things I'm going to pull back on some of those because I thought they were just some of the things you said were so interesting. One of the things that you said was the world is going digital. I think you were talking about textbooks at the time, but even 3 years later, the world has actually gone digital. Which is really, really interesting to see what effect this is going to have, on society and I think getting into the other social sciences, they're going to have lots to look at as well.
Sure, I'll just give you one example. I was talking with my department chair in a Zoom call yesterday, and we were talking about inviting a particular speaker to campus next semester. And she brought up the idea that, we don't have to spend money to physically bring somebody to campus, taking a lot of our time and a lot of their time, in order to have them come and speak and interact with our students. And I got to thinking about afterwards that, yes, we could do maybe a weekly or speaker series where we bring in people from all around the country that we would never take the time and money to do under normal circumstances. And so this is stimulating us to think creatively as to how we can use this technology when the world gets back to normal.
Yeah, we are gaining, and another theme from our first chat was skills, and we are gaining all sorts of skills that have got to change things moving forward. I mean, even in online education, which I know that there is research that has gone on in online education, but in the psychology world, I mean, we've been talking for a couple of years about how the quality of professional development for online psychology instructors is essentially very little, maybe nothing specifically that we're offering, unless somebody does a talk at, the annual conference on teaching or something like that. But it's never really a track or something like that. I think that's going to change now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
So
you're
I've been
part of it.
Well, I think, yeah, exactly. I think we're all part of it, and we're all forced to be. So, yeah, it's exciting to hear where it's, or to see where it's going to go. I was listening to you talk about that meeting that you were just in, and I actually thought you were going to end that story by saying, "Are you guys crazy? Of course, we can't just do things digitally. We need to keep bringing people in."
Yes, I mean, that was my initial impulse. And I do think there's value to bringing somebody in to have a sustained engagement with us, to break bread together and to really form friendships. So I don't want to diminish that. But given the alternative is doing nothing or doing very little because it's so costly in time and resources, that this could be an interesting new approach to connecting our psychology community on my campus with a wider world of psychology and meeting more people.
Yeah, yeah. And especially, I know you said nationally, but I'm also thinking internationally, which is even more challenging. And I know that a lot of our,
Absolutely.
right, the APA and Division Two STP has really been working at internationalizing psychology in this community since I've been around anyway. So this is a cool opportunity for them.
Absolutely. And you've just stretched my own thinking about that. Why not?
Yeah, why not? Um, so what's keeping you busy these days? Are you doing anything differently than you would be doing?
Apart from working from home, I mean, what I've been doing recently is very recently, I mean, just this week, I've written a couple new essays that will appear on talkpsych.com. I was working on one 5 minutes before our phone call started. And happily for me, a collection of essays is going to appear as a trade book, likely in about 2 years, published by Farrar Straus in New York City. And so my first draft of a whole buffet of essay possibilities will go off to the editor today or Monday. And so I've really had so much fun doing this.
What are you writing about these days, Dave?
Well, just for example, I had a conversation yesterday, kind of email back and forth with my editor. And we had a little debate about this interesting problem. And it has to do with vaccine development and why it's taking so long. It's going to take so long to do because you have to, as Bill Gates has explained in his recent explanation of the process, you need to ultimately, in a phase 3 clinical trial, give a vaccine to about 6,000 people and then just wait for nature to take its course and some of them to be exposed to the virus and see whether those who've been vaccinated are immune and suffer no ill effects, whereas those who haven't been vaccinated uh, are more likely to catch the virus. That takes so long and it costs so much money, and there's so many people that are going to die, and so much world poverty if that's going to grow if the shutdown continues. There's an alternative way to do that, and that's with what's called a human challenge study, in which you take, say, 100 volunteers And in a double-blind clinical trial, you give half of them the vaccine, and then you expose all of them in a medically controlled quarantine setting to the virus. Excuse me, you expose them all to the virus, but half have been vaccinated. And then you see whether those who are vaccinated are protected, those who aren't vaccinated get the virus. But medical ethics does not allow that experiment to be done. And I got to thinking, this is a perfect parallel to the trolley problem, the classic trolley dilemma. Would you, if a trolley were barreling down the track towards 5 people tied to the track, all of whom are going to die, and you're standing by the side and there's a lever that would allow you to, if you pull that lever, switch the trolley onto another track where it would kill one person, would you actively intervene and cause the death of that one person in order to save 5? Utilitarian ethics says, well, of course, this is pragmatic. One person will die instead of 5. And it seems to me that the situation we're now faced with is a perfect parallel to the trolley problem. Are you willing to pull the lever and invite some young adult volunteers who would be at minimal risk? Because in your state of Washington, for example, virtually nobody under age 30 has died of the coronavirus. Um, in order to save many lives down the road. And we had an argument about this. I would pull the lever. I think the experiments should be done. And so anyway, I've made this into an essay that presents both arguments and then invites the reader to think about what they would do. As a little footnote, by the way, after drafting this essay, I wake up and today's New York Times has an article on exactly this dilemma and the arguments pro and con doing it.
So did you write both sides of the argument in the essay then?
Yes. So I tried to give exactly equal number of words to both sides of the argument. And I used my editor's comments, now supplemented by some things I read in the New York Times this morning, to give you don't pull the lever. You allow nature to take its course. You have a long clinical trial process that's going to take more than a year to give us a vaccine, even if many, many thousands of people will die during that interval. And then I also give equal space to the logic of the other side. I mean, what we all the time people are electing to put themselves at risk for the sake of the community. Young adults go into battle doing that, and this is much less risky and much less morally ambiguous than most of those situations. But I'm already showing my hand as to which side of the argument I've been on. By the way, I also learned this morning that 35 congressmen have written the Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare, Human Health Services, to propose just this sort of research. And so I'm with those Congress people.
Have you always been a pull the lever kind of person on that trolley problem?
Yes, I think so. And I've just never seen an actual real world situation that played that dilemma out on such a large stage.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about that whole theory because the psychology of it is, why do people make the choices they would make in a situation like that, and then they change the situation, right? So it's isn't the next step in that problem, would you actually push somebody? Wasn't that the original?
Right.
Is that correct?
Sure. That's another version of the problem. If you had a large person that was at a subway station, and if you could push that person off the subway platform onto the tracks and stop the trolley and save the 5 people down the trolley track, would you do that? I mean, that's even a more direct engagement. And that's a more difficult act, just as shooting a person in war that you see across the field is a much more difficult act than dropping bombs from the sky on unseen people. Think of Milgram's experiments, where the levers were more likely to get pressed if somebody wasn't in the same room as or couldn't hear the person who was being harmed by the action.
Yeah, it is such an interesting parallel. So where will this essay, is this one of the essays that's going to come out in the book, or is this more immediate?
Well, this is for talkpsych.com.
Okay.
The book, by the way, won't appear for about 2 years or a little less, maybe a year and 2/3, because the publisher tells me that after the election next fall, there will be a glut of books on politics, followed by a backlog of books that haven't been published because politics have sucked the air out of the room. And so we want to wait for all of that to subside. And that's why it's about January of 2022 when this book will appear.
Oh my goodness. That's very, very interesting. So is this pretty universal for people who are wanting to present book ideas to publishers right now? Is this what you're hearing?
I don't know.
Okay.
I do not know.
Yeah. Well, it seems like our society is completely caught up in politics, so it would make sense to me that is true.
Right. And in the meantime, I have great fun just looking at what's happening in the world and thinking about ideas and findings and insights in psychological science that shed light on real phenomena. By the way, the essay I wrote just before this, that also hasn't yet appeared, asks the question, and this is a little politically loaded, but I'm trying to make this nonpartisan. I'm trying not to show any partisan cards here, but it is a fact that Democrats are much more likely to honor and respect shelter-in-place norms, to wear masks, and less likely to protest shutdown orders than are Republicans. What's the reason for that political difference? Is it because Democrats are just more docile and submissive? I don't think so. Is it because they're more generally knowledgeable about science? Well, Pew Research gave a general basic science quiz to people across the political spectrum and found Republicans and Democrats, on average, about equally informed. But there was a difference in which party respects science and higher education the most. And then that raises the question, why is that? Anyway, so I'm kind of playing with some of these ideas too. That's all in response to your asking, what am I thinking and writing about right now as we're having this conversation?
Oh, Dave, I can tell you that myself and all of our listeners could just listen to you talk about this stuff for a long, long time. I find it fascinating.
I love talking about it.
Well, I wonder if there is an opportunity for you to write these essays and then to do some recordings because we love your voice too. So it would be nice to hear you talk about these things, even as you put them out, if you find something really interesting. In fact, Psych Sessions will do this anytime for you. If you want to talk about something you're writing, we would love to push it out for you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I remember.
And I would say, by the way, essays that are really kind of time limited are likely not to make it in this book, which has to be applicable. I mean, the essays have to work 4 years from now as well as right now.
Right. Well, and that's a really nice thing about this modality is that we can push things out today, right? So that's very nice. I remember that you. Well, gosh, I've seen you speak so many times now, but one of the things that I really like about your talks, and I don't know, I suspect you didn't always give these kinds of talks throughout your career, that it comes with some experience. I've always liked that you are speaking about politics and group differences. I know that's kind of where you come from. That's your educational background is in social psych and group polarization, if I remember correctly, specifically. Yeah. So when did you start getting interested in politics? Because if I'm guessing right, you find it fascinating.
Yes, I'm a news junkie. So I've subscribed to both the New York Times and the Washington Post, read them every day, and follow political commentary. At the same time, I'm obliged, Garth, to be respectful of the diversity of my readers, who are conservatives and progressives, Republicans and Democrats. And so what I want to do is offer information into public discourse. And so occasionally there's a place for me to take a position, but in what I'm posting on Talk Psych and certainly in textbook writing, I'm not at liberty really to be partisan. I want to help educate the public to be discerning. But I
Yeah.
am partisan. But I just can't show
Right.
my hand very often.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think I align pretty closely to you politically. That's my guess. And when I hear you give those talks, though, you don't really let anybody off the hook, and that's what I appreciate about those talks. And maybe that's the benefit of being, a psychologist is that there is no there. It's a different set of values that we're working with.
Yes. And as teachers, as well as textbook authors or essay writers, we have an obligation to discern and fairly report evidence on both sides of an issue, as long as it's credible evidence. And sometimes the evidence, I must say, leads one in a progressive direction. So we have a lot of research on the social toxicity of extreme inequality, on sexual orientation as a natural enduring disposition, for example. But we also have research that shows the benefits of marriage for human flourishing, the association of religious engagement with health and well being. And so, although psychological scientists tend to be political progressives, they're overwhelmingly Democrat rather than Republican, the evidence is allowed to speak for itself. And sometimes it affirms progressive ideas and sometimes it affirms conservative ideas. And so I'm just called to be a reporter and to let that evidence speak for itself. Now that's at least the ideal. I'm not saying I'm totally free of bias or values.
Well, I would say that, in my humble opinion, that you've towed that line very nicely. And I think that just being in the high school psychology world a little bit, I'm often thinking about our audience base and how they come from all different walks of life as well. And but for I mean, you're really beloved by so many high school teachers and college instructors around the country who have seen you
Yeah.
speak. And
It's a,
I think you've worked hard at being that
by the way,
neutral voice. Yeah.
yeah, if I interrupt you, your voice was kind of going in and out on me there. But let me just say, it's just a huge privilege and a genuinely felt responsibility to be able to have a conversation not only with so many college and university students across the world, but also so many AP psych students in high schools, predominantly in the United States, but in some other countries as well. And those students and their teachers have been so kind, and it's just been one of the real joys for me to be able to
Yeah.
engage that world.
Well, thanks for letting me know if you need me to repeat anything because things pop out. I know we've got two internet connections we're dealing with and all those kinds of things. Just let me know. But I love that you're talking about students right now because I think one of the things that our students need are models who can approach these problems from um, a scientific perspective and using that value. And again, I think you've modeled that in your writing, definitely in your talks. You've modeled that, although it's transparent that you have a personal alignment,
Right.
and yet I think you pulled it off. And to me, it's really helpful to have folks like you who we can look up to who are modeling this well and not just polarizing themselves.
Thank you so much, Garth. And let me give you another example of a model of kind of welcoming diverse views. My friend and colleague John Haidt, who's a social psychologist now in a business school at New York University, has co-created the Heterodox Academy that is welcoming more diversity within academia and within psychology as well. And he has modeled this for himself in his collaborating with Jean Twenge, another colleague friend, um, in creating a website where they're accumulating evidence pertinent to the question of whether screen time has any debilitating effects on especially teen girls, emotional state, their moods, their vulnerability to depression, their suicide ideation, and so forth. They tend to think it does, but they're accumulating evidence on both sides, and they have an open website where they invite commentary, they welcome commentary, they plead for commentary from people that disagree with them and see other data. And so it's an ongoing process where all sorts of information is invited. People are welcome to, in the free marketplace of ideas, contribute their insights. There's debate and conversation going on in hopes that out of it, greater wisdom will go. And that, in its ideal form, is also the idea of a college, too, as a free marketplace of ideas where all ideas are welcome. No ideas are shut down in advance, and evidence is put into the commons for us to share and debate in hopes that greater wisdom will grow out of that process.
Yeah, I want to ask you a tough question. If we need to edit or you don't want to answer, that's fine. But when I hear you talk about higher education being a place for ideas to kind of be measured and for pushback to happen, this year we sat in a college-wide at Cascadia College. We sat in a college-wide workshop, I guess, about free speech, what it is, what it isn't. We had the Attorney General who was with us there that day, and I was actually shocked to understand clearly what free speech is on a college campus, and I would just say that nearly everything goes when it comes to free speech. That maybe not something you have thoughts, ideas about, but maybe I'll just throw it out there to you and see what you think.
Yeah, I think there's a real question is where you draw the line. Unpopular ideas are welcome. And so if there's evidence to support them, I mean, let's lay it out there. I would say, as an example, I've been engaged in debates related to sexual orientation. And, and the question is sometimes raised, should dissenting opinions, my argument is that sexual orientation is a natural and enduring disposition, and that human beings flourish when they're connected in close covenant partnerships. And so marriage is a good for all people, for example, and all people should share the same rights. If there's somebody who thinks exactly the opposite, should they be welcome to have a voice on my campus, even if it makes some people uncomfortable? I would say yes. If my side of that conversation has credibility, it should be able to stand on its own 2 feet, and it should welcome dissenting views because it's an opportunity to engage those views. And if my side has more compelling ideas and evidence, to, in some sense, win the day over time. Okay, but at what point do you not allow hate speech that is purely demeaning of other people? I mean, so we do draw the line someplace. And at Cascade, you've got to draw a line at someplace. And so it's a question of where we draw the line. But in general, people like John Haidt and others who are arguing for allowing unpopular opinions and ideas into our journals and onto our campuses are saying, in general, it's better not to err on the side of exclusion of ideas that don't make us feel good.
Yes, and and I agree that Cascadia does draw this line at hate speech for certain, because I don't want to misrepresent them. But it made me think about what I do in the classroom as a teacher. Am I censoring things? How do I allow people the space, even developmentally, the age of the students that we teach, to think through these things, to consider the beliefs or perspectives that they have, and then to look at the science of things as well. So it is a developmental process, it seems, too.
Right. And it seems to be part of what you can do and all teachers can do is present information. And again, on the issue of sexual orientation, I mean, what I've tried to do is assemble information that I think, whatever your views are, you might want to know about. You can do with this information what you want, but as an educator and as a researcher, this is what I have to give you. And so that's the kind of attitude I take, and I hope it's one of respect towards other people with whom I might disagree. And by the way, I have family members and others whom I love deeply, care about. I think they're absolutely wonderful human beings. They differ with me on this or other topics. That's fine. I can live with that.
Yep, absolutely. When my students come into my course, I always think about how I prepare them for thinking like a psychologist, or because some of their beliefs. I mean, my own beliefs have been challenged so many times by psychological science, and so we talk about how psychologists think through things. I have them do questions about what is faith versus or what is belief versus observation, or how do we know outside of these walls, outside of psychology, how do we know things? I know you have a really nice section at the beginning of your book where you kind of help students think through ways of knowing. Has that always been in intro psych textbooks?
I don't know, and I will say that for the last 30 years, I've really not looked at I've made a practice of not looking at other intro to psych texts, and I don't have any. I don't own any others. I don't have any others in my office.
Okay.
So uh, uh, I can't say authoritatively what other books do, but I do think we all share a commitment to teaching people to think smarter, to what we call critical thinking, to know how to assess and weigh evidence, to understand what are good sources, and thus to think more rationally as well as more compassionately. So I think that's a widely shared goal among all of us in the teaching of psychology profession.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to pivot on you just a little bit. Actually, it might be jumping back, but I know that your research area, I think for your PhD, was group polarization, or at least it was something that you were involved in. With. Is that right?
That's correct. That's where I
Okay.
cut my high teeth in social psychology.
Right. So, can you tell us? And I'm sure you're right about it too, but can you tell us, what are we seeing? Is this new, the divide in politics in the United States and in the world? Was this when you first, maybe here's a question, when you first started looking at group polarization, uh, was politics your first example, or one of the early examples that best illustrated it?
Uh, I'd say no, and I'd say you're also asking a great question, Garth. And the answer is that there has been dramatically increased polarization. It's not just what you're thinking, what you're perceiving. We have survey data that shows that the percentage of people who intensely dislike those of the other political persuasion has like doubled from like 20% to about half. Would you want your daughter to marry one, so to speak? I mean, the gap between Republicans and Democrats and the overlap between, say, Trump supporters and Hillary Clinton supporters in the last election has never been greater. Why is that? It's partly because today's media allow more selective exposure to belief confirming information, ideas, and news feeds that affirm rather than challenge our pre existing views. And it's surely partly because of group polarization. We know that interaction among like minded people tends to enhance their pre existing views. And now, unlike some decades ago when we had just three major networks and no internet feeds and no social media, and we all basically got the same news, now we're getting our news from different sources. And so, like minded people can segregate themselves into ideological echo chambers. Progressive listening to MSNBC, reading the New York Times, talking to other like minded folks, conservatives doing the same with conservatives, each group sharing links to sites that affirm their own views with their friends who largely share their own views. And as a result, we end up, are we surprised? More polarized. And so, thus, there's a whole effort now to think about how can we depolarize? How can we better understand each other? And I've given support to one fledgling organization. It's just renamed itself as Braver Angels. And what they do is in towns across the country bring together reds and blues, Republicans and Democrats, for a prolonged period of conversation over a weekend or a Saturday, enabling them to better understand each other and be able to articulate what each other feels. Even if the effort is not to have them agree at the end of the weekend, but to have them understand that the others are human beings that share certain human qualities and values that they too share. And anyway, Braver Angels is just one effort to work at depolarization. That's a long answer to a great question.
Do you think that that Braver Angels strategy could be something that a teacher would introduce on a polarizing topic if they felt like they were equipped, had the skills to do it?
Sure. And you could do it. I'm thinking out loud here, Garth, but couldn't you do it in a kind of role-playing way where if you have a polarizing topic, you could invite people to role play the other side, and people on the other point of view have to, I mean, you're kind of assigned, this is like high school debate. I mean, you're assigned to debate and argue a view that you might not hold in order that you might come to understand it better. I'm also, just as saying those words, I'm reminded, I can't remember who said this, but it was some great historic figure from the past said about another person, I don't like that person. I must get to know him better.
Yeah.
And that's what we're challenged to do.
Well, that is not a popular sentiment these days, it seems to me.
Right.
And we can just silo ourselves quite easily. I hope that we, as maybe, I don't know, as psychologists, I don't know, that we would not fall into that trap, that we would understand what's going on. I think that's one of the things that our discipline gives to students is, I think about, you talked about Milgram's study. One of the things that gives to students is kind of some wisdom about how they might behave in a situation where there is an authority figure, because they know what happens in those kinds of situations. And
Yes.
in this situation, understanding group polarization is kind of a superpower to not get dragged into group polarization.
Yes. 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 And that's true of a number of psychological phenomena. So if you understand the bystander effect on helping in emergency situations, and then you find yourself in a situation observing somebody needing help and others around, might it make you, I think there is at least a little bit of evidence, and I have a number of anecdotes, might it be the case that you'll then be more likely to help because you'll think, the typical person doesn't help here. I've got to be the one that takes responsibility.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I just experienced that exact situation a couple days ago. I was out on a run and I saw a man sitting on the street in the bicycle lane, and he looked well. I mean, so I wonder if he had fallen, but he was a young man, and I didn't know. I couldn't see a bicycle, so I didn't know if he was injured. And I was probably 50 yards away, so it was kind of hard to see what was going on. And I thought to myself, should I do what I tell my students that they must do now that they're burdened with this knowledge, or do I move along? Do I want to get into this situation? And not, of course, I suppose I could have done the another thing, but I yelled down to him. I said, "Are you okay?" And he said, "Yes." And then he didn't move. And then I thought to myself, psychology did not prepare me for this step.
Oh my goodness, yes.
And there was a large truck coming, and I said, "There's a truck behind you coming." And he said, "Yep." And then that was it. Truck went past him and he stayed there. And yeah, so one of those strange situations
Right,
that will be, that'll be a story I tell in
yeah,
my next the
Sure.
class I'm
But
face
you,
to
but
face
you
with.
reached out to him and he gave you an answer.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, hey, we've got I've got about 15 minutes to get us to the hour, which is kind of our goal for this conversation. And I've got some other things that I would like to just ask you about if you're game.
Sure.
I know last time we talked, and if anybody hasn't heard that interview, please go back and watch it, listen to it, please, because it's really your life story. We talked a whole lot about where you came from and your education and career. So that's always fascinating. But one of the things that you said, so I'm going to just jump to a few different things here. But one of the things that you said as I was listening this morning was the best education is one that prepares you for do you remember how that ends?
Yes, for the unpredictable future.
Oh, very good. Yeah. Um,
Uh, and I told you the story of my life only because it's the story of most of our students' lives, namely at the time they enter college or university or as they graduate from high school, they have an idea what they want to do. People are asking them, what field are you going to study? What do you? I tell prospective students, chances are it's something else. Overwhelmingly, the odds are you're going to end up doing something different than what you think of. For me, it was grew up in a business family, went to college to become a doctor, majored in chemistry, minored in biology. Then, anyway, a whole series of events unfolded, and I ended up talking to Garth uh, on the Psychology Podcast half a century later. And that's going to be that's the story of most lives. And that's why the best education is a liberal education that prepares you for the unpredictable future, to think critically, to know who you are, what your values are, to communicate effectively, to understand some deep truths about human nature, and to be able to apply all that wisdom and knowledge to whatever vocational and life situations the future will present you.
how do we give more students or potential students that access to have that kind of an education? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, sure, that's what the core curriculum of most schools kind of mandates, certainly liberal arts colleges, such as where I teach. And that would be in contrast to vocational schooling that trains one to be an auto mechanic or in hotel management or whatever. And I don't mean to put down those trades, but for students going to a 4-year college or university and often to a 2-year college en route to education beyond, that liberal education that trains the mind more broadly in everything from historical awareness to basic scientific information to mathematical and quantitative competence to the ability to communicate who one is and what one is thinking. Uh, that liberal education, as we call it, is going to be most useful in the long run.
Right. Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. The experiences that you would have in those classrooms, what you would learn is going to have what I think is a positive effect. So what are the barriers to getting, let's just talk about America. What are the barriers to getting more students to have those experiences? Because there are vocational schools and there are students who, or high school students who decide not to go to college at all or to vocational school. Do you think it's a best path for everyone? I mean, even in this political season, we've heard, Bernie Sanders talk about college for everyone. Do you have thoughts about that?
I don't have a lot of thoughts or expertise. I would say I would not I would not argue for the same path for everybody. And so we have, as St. Paul said long ago, I mean, there are a variety of gifts, and different ones of us have different talents and interests. And so I would never want to shove everybody into the same box. And so there's a place for all these different varieties of education. But I'd
Yeah.
say for those who are wanting a higher education and don't yet know what they want to do in life, even if they think that might be X, but it's probably going to end up being Y, for those people, a liberal education prepares them for the unpredictable future.
Right. So this is important right now because students have gone home from many universities where they were maybe living on campus or something, and they've gone home to maybe hundreds of miles away, thousands of miles away, to family businesses and opportunities, and are thinking about maybe reassessing what higher education is to them. And it will be really interesting to see what enrollment looks like when we come back from this thing.
Absolutely. There's a lot of students talking about not going back to school, but then it looks like we're going to be in an economic recession. There aren't going to be a lot of jobs either. So I suspect that in the end, most of those may end up going to school. And by the way, in the last recession, 2008, 2009, as you probably know at Cascadia or and other places where you've taught, community college enrollments tended to soar during times of when there weren't jobs. But then people did seek to develop their skills through community college education.
Yeah,
So I'm guessing your enrollment will not be down come next year.
right. Yeah, it's really interesting to think through this from a community college perspective. I was talking with a couple of colleagues at big four-year institutions, one of them an R1, and they've lost revenue from sports. They've lost revenue from student housing. They've lost revenue from international students. I really do think that the community college system, because of the nature of what it is going to be a really great system that's going to serve students well here and have a pretty good chance at survival. I recently heard yesterday of a couple of universities just shutting their doors because of this, which is awful. But
right.
Yeah, I think we're in an interesting position, and I do remember those days in 2008 when enrollment was just booming.
Sure. And I would say in the present situation, there may be some tendency for people to stay closer to home, not knowing what the situation is going to be and whether they're going to need to get home. So that would also tend to nudge people towards community colleges.
That's
so I'm
right.
just guessing. What do I know?
Right. Yeah.
But
yeah.
I'm guessing community college enrollments may be up next year.
Yeah. So we talked a lot about higher education. What do you think high school teachers, AP Psych teachers, are going through right now? And I think we'll use this doorway to get to the AP exam and chat about that a little bit and the reading. But what do you think this has been like, or do you have thoughts about high school teaching of psychology in this current situation?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, my heart goes out to high school teachers of psychology. They're not able to see their students face to face. They're not able to monitor and assess them in ways that they're accustomed to doing so. They're having in-class activities and demonstrations and all the rest that filled their time. And now they're facing not the AP exam that they were educating their students to take, but rather just 2 essay questions to create the to create the AP exam. That's a kind of pale a pale substitute for what has been the comprehensive AP exam with all its questions. So
is that what they've decided to do now, is just the essay questions and not the multiple choice because they can't protect those questions from getting out?
That's my understanding.
Yeah.
And so you think about the students who've been trying to master all this material, and 99% of it they're not going to get asked about because there's just 2 questions.
Oh my goodness, those questions better be very, very, very
Right.
good.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. So I just the AP readings are shut down, which would
Right.
usually happen in June. And I just got an email from our chief reader a couple days ago, and then from College Board this morning to tell us a little bit more about what's going on. But they are going to ask readers who would usually travel and be in a big room together to read these 300,000 plus exams to do it at home. And I just don't know how that is gonna go. This is a very scary prospect for me.
Absolutely, because for AP readers, part of the incentive for investing yourself in that is the connection, the friendships you're forming, and the enjoyment you're having as you do this together as a community. And now, if you're having to do it solo in a distributed online way, it kind of sucks the joy out of it, doesn't it, to a considerable extent?
That's a huge thing. And I have a week that just came this morning. I have a week to make a decision as to whether I can be involved. And I say that specifically or on purpose to say, can I be involved? Because usually I would get permission from my college to take the last week of classes because we're on a quarter system, to take those that week of classes off. And so I would set up my course a little differently. Well, now I'm working through that time. And then I have a child at home, and my wife is an essential worker. And so I just don't even know if I will be able to do it. And so
Right.
I really am just hoping that they have thought through some of those things.
Right.
I haven't seen a letter from them that says that they have thought through those things. It looks really positive. Like what they're saying is they're just promoting optimism and thanks for doing this. And this is really important. All those things are true.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know how this is going to work.
Yeah. I hear you.
Okay. So again, I'm going to jump to a few different places here, but I had to go look it up because the first time I interviewed you, or you told me this, I had to go re-listen to it. Recently, I don't know if you knew that I was able to go down to Stanford University and do an interview with Al Bandura. Did you know that?
Yeah, I think I'd read that, but I hadn't heard the interview.
Right.
And Al Bandura is like 96 or something like that now.
Yep. Mid 90s. And then I had to double check. You both went to the University of Iowa.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Did you know that he had gone there when you went
Yes,
there?
I think I did, but I'd forgotten it. But yes.
But as a student, because you were behind him for sure by
Right.
a while,
Right.
what had he made a name for himself at that time where you were choosing colleges?
Yes.
Doctoral
Well,
programs?
yeah, his having gone to Iowa was not in my mind. I didn't know that when I elected to go there. And so that did not bear upon my decision. And I would say he was not a large presence at the university. I mean, they didn't talk a lot about their past alumni. So I was just maybe minimally aware of that.
Well, one of the things that he said was that he had talked to an advisor at the University of British Columbia where he got his undergraduate degree. And he said, where's the best psychology program? And they said University of Iowa.
Yeah. My, my experience, Garth, was a little different in that I elected to go to Iowa. I had two choices, University of Iowa or University of Illinois. And I chose Iowa because I had heard of the famed Iowa Tests of Educational Development. Mind you, I wasn't even a psych major because I was a chemistry biology student. And I put down that I wanted to study personality psychology after being enchanted by some books by Gordon Allport, the great personality researcher.
Yeah.
So I showed up at the Iowa campus and I learned two things on my first day there. One was that the Iowa Tests of Educational Development had nothing whatsoever to do with the psych department. And the second was that the program in personality no longer existed. As my new advisor explained to me, the person we had in that area just left. So we've moved you, Dave, into social psychology. And that's the story of how I became a social psychologist. Again, all part of that unpredictable life journey that we were talking about earlier. So I don't advise anybody planning their lives and their graduate education on my example.
Right. Well, and it's just interesting to me that you and Al Bandura both talk about fortuity. It's kind of weaved into your stories. You both went to the University of Iowa. You both were social psychologists. It to me, it was just a very, very interesting parallel.
And you know, another thing Al Bandura has emphasized in his career, and this probably came up in your interview, is the importance of chance encounters in shaping lives.
That's right.
And that is certainly, I mean, I've used Al Bandura's research on the importance of chance encounters because I got into textbook writing, for example, because a psychologist at the University of Illinois, James Davis, invited me to join 7 other Americans at a conference on group psychology held in Germany in 1978. So there we were with 16 other Europeans. We were assigned seats around a U-shaped table, and we spent 5 days together. And the seating lottery put me near 2 other social psychologists, one the great Irving Janis of groupthink fame, and the other a man named Ivan Steiner at the University of Massachusetts. So I got to know them, and they both did supportive things for me afterwards. And the following January, Ivan Steiner was invited by McGraw-Hill to help out on writing a social psych text, and he said no, but he gave them my name. And so in January of 1979, I got this out of the blue telephone call inviting me to think about engaging in text writing. So I think back, if I hadn't been invited to that meeting, if the seating lottery hadn't put me near him, if he hadn't thought to drop my name in that conversation, then you and I would not be having this conversation today. And lives are shaped often by fortuitous, or you might call it providential, encounters that shape lives. Sometimes to ill effects, but in this case to enormous satisfactions and blessings, including even the chance to spend an hour talking with Garth Neufeld.
Oh man, that's really kind. Thank you. Well, let me talk about your textbook writing. And by the way, for those people, because I was just listening to that with a critical ear and saying, well, no, it's, and sometimes Eric, my podcast partner, does this where he says, well, no, you worked really hard. You got yourself to that table. You got to know those people, but the random seating, it doesn't, you can't really argue with random seating.
Right.
Yeah. Where are you at with your textbook writing these days? And hold on, I'm going to revisit that question in a second. But one of the things as I've gotten to know you and as I've listened back to the conversation and even the current conversation, I realized that you just love to write. And tell me if I'm wrong, but maybe I could just ask, at what point did you realize that writing was your thing, the thing that you were good at? And I know you worked really hard on it as well, but that it brought you so much enjoyment.
I would say in the latter half of my career, when I was invited to do writing, some other forms of books before I did the textbook, it was a chore. I did not see myself as particularly good at it, and that's why I did a lot of things to try and increase my skill, from reading great writing to reading writing manuals to taking on a poet essayist as a mentor and writing coach for my writing. So it's not that I ever thought I was naturally talented, but as time has gone on, I must say I really do enjoy it. I mean, I take delight in these crafting these essays we were talking about at the beginning of our conversation today, Garth, in making words march up the screen, in and then shaping it and carving it, kind of like maybe a sculptor trying to refine some piece of work. And I do derive great pleasure from that.
How do you think about the, well, you might disagree with my question. I don't know. We'll see. How do you think about the creative process? Where do these ideas come from for you?
You know, often, and this is the experience of many writers, I don't fully understand it. They pop into my mind out of nowhere, and then I feel like I'm a scribe that needs to take down what somebody is dictating into my head. And so I might be out on a bike ride or whatever, and to go back to the beginning of our conversation, all of a sudden it occurs to me that the debate over how to develop a vaccine is a great example of the trolley problem writ large. Or I'm reading the New York Times and I think, bingo, psychological science could speak to exactly what I'm reading about. And it's just there and it kind of writes itself and I just have to type it.
I was hoping you were going to say it was like that. So yeah, some of my favorite creators, even outside of psychology, they share that experience, and um, and
And
I
I would
think
say
it's yeah. Go ahead.
one other thing, Garth, and that is I would say what I'm doing now, I could not have done in the first 10 or 20 years of my career. But life experience and age, there's a downside to it. You're not as quick, you know. Um, uh, you may not, I don't remember things as well and so forth, but I've accumulated more knowledge. I've read more. I have more of a reservoir of things to draw upon than I did when I was 30 years old. And so part of my challenge and my pleasure is trying to connect things from that reservoir. And that's what I think any writer in the last half of their life is better able to do than when they're 30 years old.
Yeah, yeah, I hear that.
Even
Um,
though when you're 30, you can do other things better. And that's when I did better science, maybe.
right, right, or maybe blind ambition just takes you different places too.
Yeah.
Maybe you're naive at 30, so you could just try a bunch of things. um, so where are you at these days with textbooks? I know that Nathan DeWall is your co-author on some of your textbooks, and you might have other co-authors. How are those going?
Correct. So, Psychology 13th edition, which is the mother book of our introductory psych text, is just been completed. I think we have the last chapter now in page proofs, and it will be out in August. And then my social psychology text, which is now co-authored by Jean Twenge, we're about a fourth the way through the development of what will become Social Psychology 14th edition. And I'm not sure the exact publication date of that, but that'll be probably about a year from this summer.
Wow,
So
congratulations.
that's where those textbooks are, and then a new AP edition will follow on the heels of the new introductory type psych text edition about a year later.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, that's great. Okay, I'm almost finished with you, but I do want to just talk about a couple things that you're involved in. How's your work with hearing loops going right now? Are you still involved in that?
Yes, very much so, and it's really quite exciting. The Hearing Loss Association of America has now embraced this technology that I've been advocating for the last you know, I don't know, 15 years or so, which is a simple technology that takes sound from a PA system and broadcasts it directly to hearing aids or cochlear implants that are equipped with a tiny, very inexpensive little $2 part called a telecoil. It's a magnetic sensor. And so we created a website, hearingloop.org, which I host at Hope College, hearingloop.org. And there's now like 3 dozen local groups across the United States that are advocating this technology in their own area. There's a national kind of task force that's working on this, and exciting things continue to happen. So it looks like, for example, uh, the U.S. Access Board is likely to mandate the inclusion of this technology on rail and subway cars in the future, um, so that announcements can be broadcast by your hearing aids and not just by a distant speaker. And the technology is coming to more and more auditoriums, worship places, and even New York Broadway theaters now. So it's really, I mean, we've made more progress than I would have thought. And it's pretty exciting.
That's great. And for those of you who are interested in this and haven't heard about it, first of all, go back, listen to the first episode because Dave talks about it a little more about his time in Europe and observing how they were doing things. And then also hearingloop.org is where you're going to find more information about that. And it's pretty cool. And the first time I ever heard you or heard about it was when you gave a talk about it at Highline College years back. So, um, which was a great, really engaging talk. Um, okay, and can you just talk to us about the Dave and Carol Myers Foundation? Where did that come from, and what are you up to? And I don't know, take that where you want.
Sure. So it's very simple. It receives all the royalties from my introductory psychology texts and the more modest royalties from any trade books, including this new book of essays that I've written. So that's where its income from. And then it accumulates money and then it gives it away. And it also does investing. And so my wife, we jokingly call, she chairs the grants committee. And we just sent out most of this year's checks within the last week. And I chair the investment committee. And one of the things we're doing that's really exciting right now is investing on the side. It's not most of the assets, but in some companies that are seeking to do good in the world. And some of them are looking very exciting. One, which is just this week submitted its materials to the FDA for approval, is a new three-dimensional ultrasound breast imaging technology that's spun off from, I think, the Wayne State University Medical School, which will enable more diagnostic um, cancer detection, particularly in the 45% of women who have dense breasts and with no radiation exposure and with complete comfort. And it looks like this is probably going to get approved, but we'll see. Another is spinoff of the University of Michigan Medical School, takes heart output from patients in ICU units and applies machine learning to that and enables medical staff, nurses and doctors to know ahead of what they would see with the human eye when a patient is likely to undergo uh, an emergency collapse situation and thus be able to save lives. But perhaps the most exciting right now is another University of Michigan spinoff company that is a vaccine development company. And one of its products, which will be announced in a press release on Tuesday, uh, probably after this, before this is posted, is a nanoparticle that can be administered to the nose, which is where the coronavirus primarily enters the body, and will last there for several hours and kill the virus and thus protect people, uh, if administered a couple times a day, from the virus while they're at work and in a situation where they might be exposed. And the the National Health Agency for another nation has confirmed that this completely kills the virus on exposure, and so it's very effective. And they're also working on vaccine development uh, for a number of for making vaccines for pandemic flu and possibly the coronavirus and a number of other things, anthrax, so forth, respiratory flus, more effective and more enduring. And it's all very exciting. NIH, the Gates Foundation, have massively supported them, and they're on the verge of some great things happening. So it's just fun to be able to support and help enable some good things to happen in the world, and that's just one of the byproducts of that.
Yeah, well, it is so cool to hear about what you are doing and the good that you guys are doing in the world. And so, we appreciate that. And we know that if we're buying a Dave Myers textbook, we know that we're supporting that stuff as well. And I know that's not the only reason to buy a good textbook, but it is a reason nevertheless. And so thanks for what you're doing there. Let's see, Dave. I think we have covered everything except let me ask you, do you have any plans to be back to your summer home in Bainbridge, your home base of Seattle, anytime soon, or is everything just on hold right now?
Things are on hold. We were hoping to be there in April when I had a meeting out in Washington State, but that got canceled. I am hoping, my wife is more skeptical, but I'm hopeful that we will be there for the last half of the summer. So we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, great. Hey, and just one more thing related to your foundation. I know that I have heard from so many people, high school teachers especially, who were just very thankful, grateful to you and Carol for supporting the high school teachers workshop there at University of Oregon last year, and that is, I think that is going to be with the support from the foundation, that is going to be an ongoing service to high school teachers outside of, I guess it's a second Clark workshop is what it is.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so we're very mindful of where the support comes from that has supported my work and enabled it and enabled our foundation. And so the chance to give back to the teaching of psychology, some of what it has given us, is something we're delighted to be able to do. And I think we have a moral obligation to do that.
Well, from all those teachers from in high schools and from the teachers that I represent in higher education, thanks so much for your time and for giving back to psychology and for everything you do and for taking the hour to sit down with me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And please know the admiration is completely mutual, because I know how hard you work, Garth, as a committed teacher, as one who supports the teaching of psychology in multiple ways, AP psychology, college teaching psychology, through this podcast, and not just this, but is also, with your wife, doing other great humanitarian work in the world that your listeners may not know about, but I do. So I am your admirer, Garth. So God bless.
Well, I appreciate that. And thank you, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Garth.